All right, let's just jump right in. Go ahead, picture your closet. What do you see? I'm guessing a whole rainbow of colors, right? You've got that bright red t-shirt, maybe a deep blue jacket. But here's the thing. Behind every single one of those colors, there's a hidden story, a huge environmental cost that, we just don't see. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the true cost of color in our clothes. And let's make this super personal for a second. Think about your absolute favorite pair of blue jeans. Yeah, that pair, that perfect shade of denim. It didn't just poof happen. It was created through a process with a pretty massive environmental footprint. So what is the hidden price we're all paying for that color? And look, this isn't just some vague idea, it's a cold hard fact. The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, you can just call them SASB, they've put it right out there. The fashion industry has a major impact. So what on earth does a phrase like adverse environmental externalities actually mean in the real world? Well, let's break it down. So that brings us to our first section, the true cost of color. This is where we really start to pinpoint the culprits behind all those fancy words. And it's not just one thing, it's a whole mix of issues that add up. When you get right down to it, it boils down to two huge problems. One, using an insane amount of water, and two, just devastating chemical pollution. And this is all coming directly from the process of dyeing fabrics and tanning leather. I mean, to get that perfect color, you need a ton of water and a whole cocktail of chemicals, which, more often than not, ends up getting dumped right back into our environment. Okay, so now we know what the problem is. But the next big question is, where is all this happening? To really get a handle on that, we need to take a look inside the fashion supply chain. And believe me, it's a journey. Here's a super simplified look at how it works. It all starts with the raw materials, of course. But the really critical part for our story is step 2, dyeing and tanning. This is the moment the color gets added, and it uses a staggering amount of water. And that leads directly, and I mean directly, to step 3, where all that leftover, chemical-filled wastewater gets discharged, often straight into local rivers. Now, here's a really crucial piece of the puzzle. We have to understand who is doing this work. A lot of the time, it's not the factory that big brands are working with directly. Nope, it's their suppliers' suppliers, what the industry calls suppliers beyond Tier 1. These are the anonymous dye houses, the mills, the tanneries that are hidden, way deeper in the supply chain. This really lays it out, right? A big brand, they definitely know their Tier 1 supplier. That's the factory that actually sews the jeans together. But the real environmental mess, that often happens way down the line, at that beyond Tier 1 level, that dye house that nobody's ever heard of. For the longest time, brands had almost zero visibility into this part of the process. And that lack of visibility, it's a huge problem. I mean, how do you hold anyone accountable for something you can't even see? Well, that brings us to our third section, the accountability standard. A tool was created specifically to drag these hidden impacts out into the light. And here it is, the SASB standards. The best way to think of these is like a nutrition label, but for a company's sustainability performance. It gives everyone, investors, consumers, you name it, a standardized way to see how a company is really doing on all these environmental and social issues. And as you can see, the standard for clothing and shoes is super comprehensive. It covers everything from the chemicals in the t-shirt you're wearing to labor conditions. But for today, we're really going to zero in on that second line, environmental impacts in the supply chain. All right, so how do these standards actually track the problem? This is where we get into the nitty-gritty. We are literally going to follow the wastewater by looking at the exact data points that companies are now expected to report on. And it all comes down to this one key metric. See, the standard doesn't ask for some vague promise to do better. It asks for a hard number. It's asking a simple question. What percentage of your suppliers are actually following the local rules when they dump their wastewater? This one question just cuts through all the noise. It translates a super complex environmental issue into a simple, unavoidable number. It basically forces a company to know exactly what's happening deep in its supply chain and then report it to the world. Suddenly, we didn't know just isn't an excuse anymore. And being compliant isn't just checking a box. It means that suppliers have to meet these really strict legal limits for every single chemical they use. It means regular testing, it means they have zero violation notices, and this is the kicker, this applies to both the main factories and those hidden dye houses way down the supply chain. So how do they get all this data? Well, a lot of suppliers use a tool called the HIG Facility Environmental Module. You can think of it as the standardized report card that all these facilities have to fill out. It helps them measure everything: water, energy, chemicals, and it provides the hard data that gets passed up to the brands. So we've got the standards, we've got the metrics, we've got the tools, but so what? Why does all of this reporting actually matter? Well, let's get into our final section, why transparency matters. This is where it all comes together. You see, for decades, this kind of pollution was just written off as an externality. That's just a business term for a side effect that never actually showed up on a company's balance sheet. It was basically invisible. But by forcing companies to measure it and put it on a report, well, now it's not hidden anymore. It becomes a number, a visible, quantifiable business risk you can't ignore. And that visibility is incredibly powerful because once investors can see that data, they can see the financial risk attached to it. Poor environmental performance is no longer just a bad headline, it's a potential hit to the bottom line. And that creates real, intense pressure on brands to finally engage with those suppliers deep in the chain and clean up their act. Ultimately, this whole thing shifts the entire conversation. It stops being just about following environmental rules, and it starts being about fundamental business risk. Things that can destroy a company's reputation, blow up its cost structure, and tank its shareholder value. And that is a language everyone in the business world understands perfectly. Which brings us to our final big question. For years and years, the environment and local communities paid the hidden price for our colorful clothes. But now that these costs are actually being counted, the question isn't if they'll be paid for, it's who is going to pay. Is it the brands, the suppliers, or is it going to be us, the people buying the clothes? It's something to think about the next time you reach for that favorite pair of jeans.